aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, the exposure triangle. All of these settings have dual functions. Aperture controls how much of your scene will be in focus. Shutter speed controls how much moving objects will blur in your shot. And ISO is like a digital game that increases the brightness of your image, but introduces grain. Most of us try to keep our ISO under 6400. These are the settings that control how bright or dark of an image you record. Look at the meter on your camera. This can be found in your viewfinder and on the screen. There's a notch that should show center if your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO are all aligned to give you proper exposure. Any adjustment to any of these three settings will move the notch, causing your image to be under or overexposed. For instance, if you're at 1/80th of a second, f1.8, with an ISO of 800, but you want more of your scene to be in focus, then you may choose to adjust your aperture dial to f4, which is 7 clicks of the dial away from f1.8. But now your meter is showing underexposed. How do you fix this? You would adjust either of the other two 7 clicks in the opposite direction. Now this goes for any of the three values in the exposure triangle. 3 clicks of the shutter speed dial may underexpose your image 1 stop. To compensate for this, you would adjust either of the other two an equivalent of 3 clicks, and you can split the difference between the two. Play around with this feature and it'll make sense. And once you understand how these dials work together with your meter, now you'll begin to unlock your creative freedom. In auto mode, your camera may choose a shutter speed of 1/80th of a second, but you're photographing a moving subject and you want to freeze the motion. Now you'll be able to quickly adjust to get your shot with the proper exposure. Now in photography, sometimes the scene is just too dark for the exposure triangle to work. This is where we add flash, but I'll do a separate video on that. Now in video, you will get locked into certain settings, so you're probably gonna need external light to compensate for your camera settings and to create separation from your background. Anytime you're doing video settings, it starts with your frame rate. 24 frames per second, 30 frames a second, 60 frames a second are the most common. So let's take 30 frames a second for an example. Your shutter speed is always going to be double 1 over your frame rate. So at 30 frames a second, your shutter speed will be 1 over 60. Your aperture is now set to give you the depth that you want in your scene. But keep in mind that aperture also affects your exposure. Next, you'll set your ISO, trying to keep it as low as possible. Now at this point, if you're filming indoors, you'll probably realize that you don't have enough light. Remember to check the meter on your display. Now you can choose to open up your aperture, giving you shallower depth. You can choose to raise your ISO, which will introduce more grain into your image. Or you can do what most videographers do and start adding light. Any LED light will get you by. I mean, you can get $30 dimmable LED bulbs, photography light sockets, and put them on light stands, and that'll be enough to get you by. But if you're in more of a professional setting, then you might want to go ahead and pick up actual video lights. I like the Xiaomi Molus X100. They're very compact, travel-friendly lights. But whatever you choose, at this point you would add light to your scene until you get the desired exposure. To help you with this, you can pick up a light meter. But generally, I just kind of eyeball it based off of my camera's built-in light meter, which can be set to different metering modes, such as partial metering, spot metering, evaluative. So all in all, that is the exposure triangle. Play around with the settings, get used to what they do, and it helps a lot when you start off with your creative vision. If you know how much of your background you want to be blurred, if you know how much of your background you want to be bright or dark, it really helps when you start off with your plan. So this is the exposure triangle. It's a tool to help you figure out your shot before you shoot it. And then you may have to supplement light, or if there's too much light, you may have to use a variable ND filter, which can screw onto the front of your lens if you're in a situation where your meter is showing you to be overexposed based on the settings that you already have locked in, or the creative choices that you've chosen to make. So that's been it. It's your boy D-Row, High Regard Photography. I'm out.